George Stubbs is the greatest painter of horses who ever lived. He was a sporting artist, but so much more than that. A man who literally dissected his subject before he felt able to paint it. He's also a tough, disturbing and complex artist, but rarely one who also strikes the broadest popular chord. So in 1977, these two paintings were about to be sold. Perhaps they were going to leave the country. And so the Tate Gallery moved in, but it didn't have the £774,000 required to buy them. So the public responded. There was an early form of lottery established. There was a crossword competition and a writing competition. And in the end, over 6 months, the money was raised by the people in order that the work should remain in the National Collection for the people.
George Stubbs was born in Liverpool in 1724. His father, who objected to his son's early artistic interests, was a currier, preparing horsehides for the local tanneries. So as a boy, Stubbs was made to work for his father, and only after his death in 1741, when Stubbs was 17, was he able to make any serious commitment to art. He worked for a short time assisting the provincial painter Hamlet Winstanley, copying prints. Afterwards, he spent time again at the family home, drawing and studying anatomy, relying for financial support from his mother. And this is the first work that is known to us by Stubbs. It was painted in 1746, when Stubbs was 22, a double portrait of Sir Henry Nelthorpe and his second wife. We don't know how the Stubbs came to be known to the Nelthorpes, but this was an important first commission, as the family would prove loyal patrons to Stubbs in the years to come. Shortly afterwards, he moved to York, furthering his study of anatomy at the county hospital. There he came into contact with the obstetrician Dr. John Burton, who asked Stubbs to illustrate a book he was currently writing on the improvements in midwifery methods. Stubbs had no experience in etching, so he went to see a decorative painter in Leeds to pick up the basics. The 18 plates that Stubbs subsequently produced were his first published works. It was around this time that Stubbs met Mary Spencer, who would remain his lifelong companion and assistant. They never married, but had a son shortly after meeting.
And then in 1754, Stubbs joined the stream of young British artists on the Grand Tour, making their way to what they consider to be the cradle of Western civilization, Italy.
Stubbs was one of the first generation of British artists for whom a trip to Italy seemed a prerequisite for success. However, Stubbs seemed unmoved by the experience, staying only a few months and finding nothing to admire, being quoted as saying, "Nature was and is always superior to art, whether Greek or Roman."
And it was this idea of drawing from nature that inspired Stubbs to study in intricate detail the anatomy of a horse. And probably with financial help from the Nelthorpes, he began the project that was to transform his reputation.
For 18 months, beginning in 1756, Stubbs, together with his companion Mary Spencer, lived and worked in an isolated farmhouse in Lincolnshire, where they embarked on a systematic study of the anatomy of the horse. Able to rely on a constant supply of dead horses from the local tanneries, Stubbs would suspend the cadavers from the ceiling on a series of hooks, forming the horse into a lifelike pose, and then he'd set to work, slowly removing the layers of skin and muscle, recording every detail until only the skeleton remained. His research was both anatomical and archaeological, delving deep into the recesses of the equine body, laying it bare in order more fully to understand how it worked from the inside out, and all in order to paint it as accurately as possible. It was the first new study of the subject for over 150 years, but it was unprecedented in its detail.
Stubbs was determined to publish the anatomy of a horse, and he brought his drawings to London, and he showed them to a number of professional engravers. But no one would take up the project because the subject matter was so unusual. So instead, Stubbs decided to publish his prints himself. And so, he worked on the project part-time while still earning a living from painting portraits, and it took him 8 years. But finally, in 1766, the remarkable anatomy of a horse was published.
And it couldn't have come at a better time, for in 1750, the Jockey Club was founded in England, made up of wealthy aristocrats intent on regulating and promoting race meetings. In addition, They were keen to find an artist who could depict their prized horses in a realistic manner, and Stubbs was only too pleased to supply the market. The first commission was for the Duke of Richmond, for his seat at Goodwood House in Sussex. And this is Stubbs' first depiction of the horse in paint, of the Charlton Hunt. The Duke, who was 28 at the time of the painting, an active military officer, is in the centre of the picture, sitting tall in his saddle, wearing the Goodwood blue, the livery of the Charlton Hunt, with his brother, Lord George Lennox, advancing towards him. And in the background, the hunt itself takes place. The Charlton Hunt kennels were famous for their thoroughbred foxhounds, and these, in the foreground, were the first that Stubbs had the chance to observe, portraying them with great individuality and a little affection. With the backing of such patrons, Stubbs started the most productive period of his career. Beginning in 1762 with a series of paintings of mares and foals, Stubbs arranges his work in an almost classical frieze-like composition, free from the bridles, the saddles and the spurs of the racecourse, and they seem almost sculptural in form, illustrating just how Stubbs was trying to elevate mere animal paintings to the status of high art. This combination of drawing from life and then arranging the horses into an idealised composition was a potent one. But Stubbs' painting went a stage further in perhaps his greatest and certainly his most eye-catching masterpiece.
It's called Whistle Jacket, and it's one of the greatest equestrian paintings ever made. Now, Whistle Jacket was a Palominian stallion owned by the Marquis of Rockingham, who'd made his owner a pretty substantial fortune on the racecourse. But he was retired in 1759, put out to stud, but 3 years later, Rockingham decided he wanted a painting of his prized possession. Now, there's all sorts of stories about this work, not least because Whistle Jacket has no background. There's no context. Instead, he's set against a void. And one of the theories is that, in fact, Rockingham, who was intricately involved with affairs of state and later, for a brief period, became Prime Minister, wanted to commission an equestrian portrait of King George III. And that having got this far, he decided, along with Stubbs, that they wouldn't bother to put the king on the horse, nor would they bother to fill in the background. Now, that may or may not be true. What I think is certainly true, and we know this from Stubbs's records, is that he always paints the horses first and then the background second. And I think that he probably realised, along with his patron, that this was enough, that it needed nothing else. But it gives the work a kind of timeless quality and a very contemporary or very modern feel too. It's the kind of painting